For decades, Iraq stood as a central state in the heart of the Middle East, a country rich in resources, with a deep history and a vibrant culture. But at the dawn of the 21st century, the political game shifted suddenly, and a series of events began that would change the fate of millions of people. Plans were made behind closed doors, intelligence documents were meticulously crafted, and news stories spread to serve a single narrative. The official excuse? Weapons of mass destruction and secret nuclear programs, a supposed immediate threat to global peace. Let's take a step back. Why was Iraq suddenly considered such an urgent threat? Since the 1990s, there had been a long history of hostility. An international coalition had imposed strict sanctions on Baghdad after the Gulf War. Decision-makers viewed this as a ticking time bomb. Old stereotypes of a dictator who hides his secrets made it easier to craft the story. But there's a more precise point. The information itself was far from consistent. Reports from multiple sources came with conflicting tones. Some claimed weapons were being developed, while others said programs had been dormant since the 1990s. The political administration chose which parts of the information served its agenda. And in the political context, this wasn't just a matter of words. This was a life and death decision for an entire population. The White House prepared its speeches, Britain drafted its pages, and other countries hesitated or agreed under diplomatic pressure. The critical moment came at the United Nations.
On February 5, 2003, the foreign minister of a major country stood before the world. He presented photos, slides, and evidence he claimed was beyond doubt. It was cinematic. Slides showing pipes, satellite images, and testimonies about mobile laboratories. The broadcast reached every household. Voices rose across nations and parliaments. Public opinion split between fear and resistance to war. But behind the scenes, issues sparked by later information flashed like landmines. One of these was the Niger story. The claim that Baghdad had sought to purchase uranium from Africa. This uranium incident was not a trivial technical matter. A single line made its way into the U.S. President's State of the Union address, later presented as fact. But the documents supporting that line were either forged or weak. The greatest embarrassment was not merely an intelligence failure. There was a deliberate political leak that later turned into a full-blown scandal. Former diplomats were tasked with investigating and submitted reports stating that the claims lacked solid evidence. Yet this did not stop the political narrative from moving forward. In Washington and London, the steps toward action began to take their final form. At the same time, additional documents entered the stage, shaping public perception. There was information about specialized pipes claimed to be materials for uranium enrichment. A single technical interpretation was promoted, often simplified as clear proof of a nuclear program. Later, technical experts clarified that these pipes could be used for civilian industrial purposes, but in the eyes of the public, the narrative outweighed the technical explanation. Then came the decisive political moment. The decision for war. In March 2003, the world watched as military movements unfolded. Troops amassed along borders. Stories of last warnings were followed by a war whose outcome would be measured only in devastation. After the troops entered, a massive inspection campaign began. Teams of inspectors entered sites, searching through boxes, pipes, documents, and laboratories, everything that could confirm or refute the pre-war narrative. What they found turned the story on its head. Post-war investigation reports indicated that Iraq had not stockpiled usable weapons of mass destruction since the end of the Gulf War in 1991. This revelation was not just a line on a page, it was a conceptual explosion. Why had nations mobilized against a threat that did not exist at that scale? One answer stood out amidst the noise, speaking plainly what was whispered behind closed doors: oil. Oil was a central factor that could not be ignored. Iraq possessed some of the largest oil reserves in the world, and at the heart of the Middle East lay a nexus of global interests. According to energy and diplomatic experts, reopening the Iraqi oil market and reshaping the rules for crude export were key components in the calculations of the powers that decided to act. Controlling the oil fields or the export routes meant economic and political influence that undermined dependence on other powers. This does not justify the war, but it explains one of the real motivations behind the decision-making process. Beyond oil, there was a desire to redraw regional influence. After September 11th, priorities in major capitals shifted dramatically. Security became the top priority, and the opportunity to reshape the map of the Middle East presented itself to administrations that saw a chance to weaken regimes they considered hostile, replacing them with arrangements more favorable to their interests. Additionally, there were the interests of giant energy companies and financial institutions, which viewed post-war reconstruction as a massive market for construction and contracts. All of this together created a mix of strategic and economic motivations, intertwined with the security and legal pretexts. But we must not underestimate the power of rhetoric. In politics, the narrative is crafted above all else. When a dangerous image is presented to the world, when doubts are replaced with a language of certainty, when peace is framed as a secondary option, the decision becomes easier for those in power. Politics then enters a game of choosing between making a mistake or hesitating, a hesitation often interpreted as succumbing to danger. Many leaders chose action. Some saw it as a source of strength and proactivity, while others described it as a passage from logic into historical irresponsibility. Investigative and oversight reports tracked what happened behind the scenes. Congress itself scrutinized intelligence reports critically and found that some assessments were exaggerated or not sufficiently supported by sources. In the UK, an independent report later concluded that intelligence was not competent enough to justify certain official statements before the war. Yet, amidst the documents and findings, the human cost was immense. Civil wars erupted following the fall of the regime. Thousands of civilians died. Millions were displaced. Entire countries were shaken. The region entered a cycle of violence that would not end quickly. Since then, one question has continued to haunt the corridors of power. Who bears the responsibility? Leaders claimed they relied on the best available information. Others responded that there was a narrowing of evidence selection, and positive spins were used to push public opinion toward a final decision. Additional factors cannot be ignored: pre-existing perceptions of the regime, geopolitical pressures, and strategic interests. Small details often created the larger picture. For instance, an intelligence dossier on mobile laboratories was used as a compelling element in presentations. Post-war analysis revealed that interpretations of these files were often exaggerated. Internal leaks were no less significant. The scandal surrounding the leak of intelligence agent Valerie Plame's identity was part of a political battle within the country over who was behind questioning the information. The leak did not merely alter one person's life, it highlighted attempts to undermine a political opponent from within the corridors of power. This dual narrative, intelligence versus political narrative, has shaped discussions for decades. Subsequent investigations were not aligned behind a single government. There was a clash between agencies and institutions. In the United States, Congress conducted reviews, and the media participated with major investigative projects. In the United Kingdom, a full inquiry committee published a report on the government and intelligence's role in paving the way for the war. Yet even with reports and investigations, the voice of the streets and the daily tragedies remained the strongest. Citizens lost their homes, families found their children on death lists, men and women did not know when or if they could return to their previous lives. This is the trade-off that occurs whenever the world chooses the path of military force over diplomatic solutions. Some analysts argue that the war opened the door to new regional rivalries, the rise of extremist groups, and a long-term state of instability. Others see the removal of a repressive regime as a historical accomplishment, despite the cost. The reality is far more complex than a single answer. Yet harsh lessons emerged from the experience. First, the power of political rhetoric is no less than the power of evidence. Language can shape the will of nations. Second, gathering and analyzing intelligence requires professionalism and independence, free from political influence. Third, transparency and accountability after any military decision are essential to reduce errors in the future. Fourth, when massive economic interests such as oil, contracts, and reconstruction intersect with a military political decision, the likelihood of using pretexts to serve broader objectives increases. It is time to pause at one final, equally important scene. Official documents years after the war stated bluntly, Iraq did not possess ready-to-use stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction as claimed before the invasion. This does not erase the fact that the previous regime was capable of considering the possession of such weapons, but having the intention is not the same as having operational capability at the time of the invasion. Another truth revealed by time is that energy interests and international influence played a central role in shaping the political climate for war. In conclusion, and as I always say, what was told is only half the story. The rest is told here. This story remains a school for the future. It teaches leaders that scrutiny before making a decision must be relentless. It teaches journalism to maintain its independence as a guardian of information. It teaches citizens to question more before agreeing to send their children into battle. What remains unwritten is how to repair relationships torn apart by war. And yet, the final question lingers: was the war a necessity or a choice? There may be no definitive answer, but now we have documents and evidence, we have victims, and we have lessons. And the story does not end here. It is a chapter in a larger book of international politics and human history. The end of the episode? No, it is the beginning of ongoing scrutiny.